The path to victory is rarely pure and never simple. Machiavelli didn't teach us to be evil. He taught us to be effective. And in a world that rewards results over intentions, necessary evil isn't a choice. It's the only way to survive and thrive. Let's be clear from the start. Moral purity by itself is not enough to survive in this world. If you think being ethically flawless is enough to achieve success, you're living in a fantasy. And the worst part is that you know it, even though you refuse to accept it. How many times have you watched someone less talented but more cunning rise above you? How many times have you followed all the rules only to see rule breakers rewarded with promotion, wealth, and respect? You've been taught that goodness prevails, that honesty and integrity are always rewarded. But the reality is different. The world doesn't reward the virtuous. It rewards those who understand when virtue must yield to necessity. And this is where Machiavelli comes in. Machiavelli understood something that most people ignore. Human systems reward strategic flexibility, not moral rigidity. In The Prince, he made it clear that virtue without the capacity for necessary evil is a weakness, that goodness without tactical darkness is a trap. And now tell me, how many times have you fallen into that trap? Think about those you admire, those who have achieved great things. Do you think they got there only with clean hands? No. They got there because they knew when to compromise, because they understood that morality is not an absolute, but a tool. Knowing when to uphold it and when to bend it is the difference between being a leader and being a footnote. The problem is not that you have principles. The problem is that you don't know when to set them aside. You believe that all players in life's game have the same rulebook as you, but that's not the case. The world is full of ethical chameleons, disguised as purists, of strategic thinkers who can spot moral inflexibility from miles away. And you, without realizing it, have been the perfect target. This is where Machiavelli offers you an alternative. Necessary evil. It's not about becoming a villain. It's not about abandoning all ethics. It's about understanding that principles must be accompanied by a clear-eyed view of reality. It's about learning to read situations, to analyze consequences, to know when. Adherence to principle creates more harm than good. Machiavelli said that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And you, what have you chosen? Surely you've chosen to be loved, to be respected for your consistency, to be seen as reliable. But tell me, what have you gained from that? Not influence, not effectiveness. What you've gained is that others know they can predict, and therefore outmaneuver you without consequences. Because principle without pragmatism doesn't inspire respect. It invites exploitation. Don't get confused. I'm not telling you to abandon ethics. I'm telling you to learn when ethics must yield to necessity. Understand that the world doesn't reward the righteous. It rewards the effective. That true virtue is not unwavering adherence, but the ability to balance ideals with reality. Machiavelli taught that results matter more than methods. It's not only about your intentions, but about what you actually accomplish. If your perfect morality produces disaster, what good was your purity? If a necessary compromise creates prosperity, wasn't that the greater good? How many times have you clung to principle, even as you watched it lead to failure? How many times have you rejected pragmatic solutions because they weren't ideologically pure, only to realize this makes everyone lose more than they gain? It's not about being immoral. It's about being strategically flexible. The key is knowing when principle serves your goals and when it undermines them. Ethics are valuable when aligned with reality, but if you treat them as immutable, regardless of circumstance, they become your worst liability. The mistake of many principled people is thinking that the world values consistency above all. It doesn't. The world values results, effectiveness, the ability to navigate complexity. Principles are only respected when they produce progress. If your morality creates stagnation, your ethics become irrelevant. And here comes a concept that very few understand: the contextual nature of right action. It's not enough to know what's right in theory. You must know what's right in this specific moment. It's not enough to have principles. You must know when they apply and when they don't, because in this world, absolute rules matter less than adaptive responses to changing circumstances. Think about this. How many times have you seen a rigid moralist fail where a pragmatist succeeded? How many times have you seen an idealist break against reality while an adaptable person shaped it to their advantage? And this is where many fail. They believe that ethical consistency by itself is enough, that principled positions will speak for themselves. But the world doesn't work that way. The world doesn't reward those who are right in theory. It rewards those who can make things happen in practice. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. It's not just about what you believe, but about what you can accomplish. Results are everything. Have you ever wondered why the most effective leaders sometimes make decisions that seem questionable? Why do those who create lasting change often break with convention? The answer is simple: because they judge actions by consequences, not intentions. Idealistic people believe that good intentions guarantee good outcomes, that adhering to principle, regardless of consequence, is the right approach. But in reality, outcomes determine value, and you can't separate means from ends without courting disaster. Machiavelli said that a leader should not deviate from what is good if possible, but be able to do evil if constrained, not because they should prefer evil, but because in a world of competing interests and limited resources, sometimes the greater good requires uncomfortable choices. Learn to judge actions by their results, to consider not just what feels right, but what actually works, to maintain focus on ultimate objectives rather than procedural purity. Because the moment you become enslaved to process regardless of outcome, the moment you prioritize how over what, you lose any practical effectiveness you might have had. The greatest leaders in history, in politics, business, social movements, or any field, understood this. Strategic compromise is as necessary as principled stands. Think of someone who truly changed the world, someone with lasting impact. Are they someone who never compromised, who never got their hands dirty, or someone who understood when purity must yield to necessity, who always kept the ultimate goal in sight? The problem with many is that they confuse inflexibility with integrity. They believe that if they ever compromise, they have betrayed themselves. But it's not about betrayal. It's about understanding that different circumstances require different approaches. Think about this. How many times has your rigid adherence to principle resulted in failure? How many times have you rejected viable solutions because they weren't perfect, only to achieve nothing at all? Power is not in unyielding positions. Power is in knowing when to hold firm and when to adapt. And here comes the big lesson that almost nobody applies. The one who knows when to compromise, the one who understands necessary evil, commands the most respect. Why? Because flexibility creates effectiveness. Effectiveness creates results, and results speak louder than intentions. If you always stand on principle without considering consequences, people will admire your consistency but not follow your lead. If you always insist on purity regardless of practicality, people will praise your ideals but seek guidance elsewhere. But when you balance principle with pragmatism, when you choose your battles strategically, when you understand that sometimes the ends do justify the means, that's when people will truly listen. Many believe that the key to moral living is to follow predetermined rules without question. But the reality is different. The one who follows rules blindly often causes more harm than good. True ethics require calculation, not just compliance. Think about this. Why do certain leaders earn deep respect despite making difficult, sometimes questionable decisions, while others, despite their perfect record of rule following, never earn real authority? The difference lies in their understanding of moral complexity. Machiavelli said that a ruler must learn how not to be good, not because goodness itself is wrong, but because rigid goodness in a fluid world creates vulnerability. When you're always predictably good according to fixed rules, when you never consider context or consequence, people start taking your reactions for granted. You become manipulable, unable to respond effectively to those who don't share your constraints. This doesn't apply just to politics or power. It applies to relationships, career, life itself. When you give away your ability to surprise, to adapt, to occasionally break pattern, you become a known quantity, safe perhaps, but ultimately ignorable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. If you always act according to the same moral code regardless of circumstance, if you're always predictable in your responses, decisions and positions, others will learn to work around you, to use your consistency against you. But when you're strategically flexible, when people are never quite sure which principle you'll prioritize in a given situation, you become formidable. And when you're formidable, they respect you. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. A leader whose moral responses can be mapped in advance is a weak leader. But a leader who maintains a certain ethical unpredictability, who changes approach when necessary, who never lets others fully anticipate their moral calculus, that is, the leader who maintains effectiveness. And now the question is, do you want to keep being a moral algorithm that anyone can predict, manipulate, and work around? Or do you want to start being a strategist, someone who understands when principle serves purpose and when it undermines it? Because ethics without strategy is just an invitation to be rendered irrelevant. The world doesn't change its complexity for your simplicity, so learn to navigate with the moral compass that actually exists, not the one you've been conditioned to believe is the only legitimate guide. Here is where most moralists fail. They confuse emotional comfort with ethical correctness. People believe that the right action is the one that feels good, that doesn't create internal conflict, that lets them sleep easily at night. But true mastery, the one Machiavelli understood better than anyone, lies in the ability to tolerate necessary discomfort. Because the one who cannot bear moral ambiguity, the one who needs absolute certainty, the one who requires emotional peace, at all costs becomes incapable of effective action in a complex world. Think about the last time you chose principle over practicality and watched as your perfect morality produced disastrous results. The moment you prioritized your ethical comfort over actual outcomes, who really benefited? It wasn't those you sought to help. It was only your sense of self-righteousness. Because the one who cannot bear the weight of necessary compromise, the one who needs black and white morality in a grayscale world, that is the one who ultimately causes harm while claiming to do good. Here's the truth. Those who really make positive change are not the most righteous. They are the ones who can bear the burden of moral complexity while everyone else retreats to comfortable absolutism. Most people want moral clarity now. They want ethical simplicity now. They want to know they're right now. But what Machiavelli taught, what the great leaders in history have applied time and time again, is that sometimes doing the seemingly wrong thing in the short term creates the right outcome in the long term. The world is full of people who demand immediate moral satisfaction, who make decisions based on what feels ethically comfortable in the moment, without considering the extended consequences. But those who really control outcomes know how to delay ethical gratification. They know how to accept temporary moral discomfort for lasting positive impact. Think of a surgeon. They don't refuse to cut because cutting causes harm. They accept the necessary harm of the incision for the greater benefit of healing. This is the game of consequential ethics. It's not always about having clean hands in the moment. It's about creating the best possible outcome over time. Machiavelli said that fortune favors the bold, but not the impulsive. It's not about rushing to the most emotionally satisfying moral position. It's about calculating which approach, over time, creates the greatest good. And now I ask you, are you one of those who rushes to ethical judgment without strategic consideration? Or one of those who weighs all factors before determining the right course? Because in this world, moral effectiveness does not belong to the purest. It belongs to the wisest. To those who understand that sometimes you must take one step back to move 3 steps forward. That sometimes the path to the greater good runs through territory that looks suspiciously like necessary evil. And if you apply all of this, you will stop being a victim of your own rigid thinking and start being a true moral agent. The world will remain complex, but now you will know how to navigate it effectively. But here comes what truly makes the difference between those who merely feel good about their ethics and those who actually do good with them. The ability to bear the weight of necessary compromise. Because now you know, now you understand that moral purity alone isn't enough, that consequences matter more than intentions, that strategic flexibility beats rigid principle when actual human welfare is at stake. But what good is all this if you keep acting like every ethical question has a single simple answer? If you want different results, you must become someone who engages with the full complexity of moral reality, not in the sense of abandoning principles altogether, but in the sense of understanding when principle must yield to necessity. The problem with most people is that they think moral questions have easy answers. They follow the same ethical patterns. They react with predictable righteousness. They move within the boundaries of acceptable thought without ever questioning whether those boundaries serve real human flourishing. But those who truly make a positive difference, those who change the world for the better, are the ones who dare to ask uncomfortable questions. What if this principle, applied here, causes more harm than good? What if temporary compromise leads to greater justice in the end? What if necessary evil isn't really evil at all, but the only realistic path to meaningful improvement? And here's the big secret. The world is designed to reward moral simplicity while punishing moral complexity. If you embrace the easy answers, you'll be praised but accomplish little. If you engage with the hard questions, you'll be criticized but potentially change everything. The only way to win, to actually create positive change rather than just feeling righteous, is to step outside conventional moral thinking. Be the one who considers all factors, the one who doesn't react with knee-jerk judgment, the one who always asks, not, is this consistent with my principles? But, will this actually improve the situation? Be the one who, when they speak on ethical matters, people listen, because your word isn't cheap moral currency, but hard-earned wisdom about what actually works. When you learn this, something changes within you. You realize that you were never weak. You were simply not thinking strategically enough. You realize that your moral positions haven't been ignored because they lack merit, but because they lack practicality. But now you know. And knowing this is dangerous, because the moment you apply it, there's no turning back. The moment you start judging actions by consequences rather than intentions, the moment you begin considering what works rather than what merely feels right, you will start noticing how the world responds differently to you. The idealists who used to dismiss, you will start questioning their assumptions. Those who used to consider you naive will begin to wonder what changed in you. Those who used to outmaneuver you will begin to treat you as a serious moral agent because you are no longer the same. Now you are someone who understands that ethics without effectiveness is empty, that purity without impact is pointless. And here comes the most important decision. Are you going to apply this wisdom or return to comfortable moral simplicity? Because what separates those who feel good from those who do good is not knowledge, but action. You can stay here with this information floating in your head as an interesting but ultimately academic idea. Or you can start implementing it, questioning when principle serves purpose and when it undermines it, considering consequences rather than just intentions, focusing on actual outcomes rather than moral appearances. The choice is yours, but I warn you of something. If you go backward, if you retreat to the safety of absolute rules and simple answers, you will do so with the awareness that you're choosing comfort over effectiveness, that you're prioritizing how you feel about your ethics over what your ethics actually accomplish in the world. Or you can start changing now. Small adjustments,